Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Comic Book Nation's Quick Save, where we are going to talk all about Fallout, the Fallout TV show that is now releasing on Prime Video. I am your host, Logan Moore. Joining me today, likely our biggest Fallout fan here at Comicbook.com, is Charlie Ridgely. Hello.
I don't know. Tanner might have some sway on me there. He don't have to duke it out for that title, but certainly Fallout's a big part of my life and my love. So a lot to break down here.
And then also joining us is Chris Killian. Chris,
The
thank you
newest
for
Fallout fan. That's me.
Yeah. I was gonna. So, I mean, this kind of sets the stage here perfectly for what I wanted to dive into first, which is just like our broad familiarity with Fallout. Chris, we'll start with you. Like, you're a newcomer to these or not the games, I guess, but just this whole universe that comes from the video games. We have seen the entirety of Fallout Season 1. We're going to give our broad thoughts here. No spoilers, so you don't have to worry about that in this discussion. Chris, is a newcomer to Fallout, what did you think about the show and just kind of this weird retro futuristic type of universe that they've got going on here?
Oh, I mean, I love the show. I've been aware of Fallout for a long time. I mean, my brother's a huge fan of the games, and I've watched him play. I also think I dabbled a little bit in like the VR game, so I was aware of the world and what the Fallout Boy mascot and the costumes and some of the creatures that you see in the games. But as far as the show goes, I mean, I was pretty much hooked from the get-go. I mean, I love Walton Goggins, huge fan of that guy, and just such an amazing just opening scene. I can't think of I mean I got to interview him for this, and I told him, I was like, I can't think of a lot of TV series where the opening scene had me hooked like as soon as this one did. So I mean, everything that I've seen, being I'd say a fairly casual Fallout fan with the games, I mean, it looked super authentic to me. So I mean, and I love what they've done with it. I love that it's an original story too, like compared to like The Last of Us, which is like such a close adaptation to the actual video game.
That was my biggest problem with The Last of Us. Like, I reviewed that for us last year, and I was like, it's great, but it's so close to the source material in some respects that it's almost like hard to really enjoy it if you're somebody who's played the game. I mean, I enjoyed it, but like I had played through those games 4 or 5 times in my life, so it's like this is just a new version of me seeing that again. Charlie, for yourself as the hardcore Fallout fan here, I'm with you too. I've played these games since I was in, I don't know, grade school, probably far earlier than I should have been playing them, to be honest. What was your big takeaway from this? Do you think this is a great adaptation? Do you think this lives up to kind of the standard that the video games have set over the years?
Yeah, I think it's honestly a way closer, a way more faithful take than I expected it to be. Because I expected, I mean, again, having watched Westworld, which Jonathan Nolan, did before this, a great show, but I expected more of the serious tone of Westworld. Bring that whole puzzle box thing to it, but that's a really dark. I mean, it has some entertaining and fun moments, but it's a pretty dark, heavy show. And given the, apocalyptic end of the world nature of Fallout and some of the serious imagery, like when you look at the covers and you see the Brotherhood of Steel, like I kind of expected them to take it more seriously than I think the source material is. Fallout is a thoroughly goofy, silly world. Yeah. It's very funny. It's really darkly funny. A lot of the characters you meet, when you hear them talk, you're like, wait, that was hilarious, and I wasn't expecting it to be. It's very silly, and this show brought that silliness out much heavier than I expected, and I was really pleased with that. It really feels like more of a comedy most of the time than a drama or than anything else. It reminded me, it's very different, but it was more similar to Twisted Metal than I expected it to be. The Twisted Metal TV show, it had that comedic undertone to all of it. I think it was funnier. It did a lot of that comedy better, but there are people that are going to come in expecting this to be more serious and be disappointed in the humor. I am not that way. I think that they nailed a lot of the really funny parts in this. And the original story that you mentioned is what really makes this cool, because Fallout, aside from the first 2 games, Fallout 3 is where everyone really kind of latched onto it and it became such a big franchise. There have been 4 games since that, and they're all huge open world things where you can explore your own story kind of, and to be able to figure out how to tell that on a TV show is really difficult. So it was really neat that they went into this realm of originality, went to a place where the games haven't really explored since Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, but even those, again, they weren't big open world stuff. So we kind of get this original story, original characters, but that ties in directly to the grander world of Fallout. So this is kind of like Fallout 4 or 4.5. I know
They're calling it Fallout 5.
Yeah,
I believe
this
Jonathan
is, you
Nolan
know,
himself has said, like, we're viewing this as Fallout 5.
They communicate. Nolan and his team communicated directly with the people at Bethesda working on Fallout 5, which won't be out forever, because they wanted to make sure they didn't touch whatever story they're doing in Fallout 5, because this is canon. So everything we see in this show is real to the world that we played in the games. The backstory, which there's a lot of backstory, I know we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, all of that becomes kind of truth to what we know in these games. It really reframes a lot of what we know about things like Vault-Tec in the games. And so it is such a fun compliment. I've been playing back through Fallout 3, kind of getting ready for this, and it's really nice to go back and forth between the game and the show, because the vibe is so similar, but the stories are so different. It really, it exceeded my expectations, but my expectations were already pretty high. So I'm really excited for other people to kind of lock into this and get excited about it and be able to like have real conversations about where it's going and what it did. And there's going to be so many Easter eggs that we didn't even notice that are going to come out over the next weeks as people watch it. It's anyway. I think it's a very, very good show, and I think it's about the best you could do trying to adapt Fallout to an 8-episode TV series.
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of things you mentioned that I totally agree with you on. The humor was a big one. I think Fallout is intrinsically kind of like hilarious at times, while also being just so extremely dark. They did a really good job with the humor. I think a lot of that really comes out with the vault type stuff in the stories, the vault dwellers who are integral to the story. I think there's a lot of humor involved there. And I think Lucy, the main character, does a really great job. Was Ella Purnell? She does a really great job as just kind of playing this, she doesn't understand the wasteland. She's grown up in a hole basically for her entire life. And they do a lot of really fun stuff with that throughout the show. Again, as somebody who's a fan of the video games, there's a lot of really cool Easter eggs. There's a lot of really cool moments scattered throughout, just like little things here and there. Like I think of like the UI being with the Pip-Boy is pulled directly from the games in a lot of instances. Same with like the computer terminals and stuff like that. Like all of that is exact. Like there's sequences where people are hacking things. It's like, oh, it's the literal exact hacking mini game from Fallout 3.
This scene that's actually playing right now in the trailer, when that scene is happening in the show, there's not like people are gonna ask about VATS. There's not a lot of VATS stuff going on, but we do get some slow-mo, and like it seems like Walton Goggins' character has like bloody mess attached. If anyone's played, the perk bloody mess, it fits like it. He feels like he's fighting in the world of the games, even though you're not pressing the buttons and doing VATS and selecting things. Like they did a good job, even with the little specifics of the action, making it feel authentic like that.
There's a lot of violence that's Fallout's very similar to like Mortal Kombat to me, like in the sense that the violence is very over the top to the point that it's funny. And there are some brutal deaths or violence and gore in this series, but there's also some very funny ones. One, I don't want to give anything specific away, but there's definitely some moments in the series. One early on that I'll say like involves a fork, which I thought was very funny, if you know what I'm talking about there. So yeah, like I again, they do a great job with all those things. The one thing I wanted to mention about we've talked about the original story. I don't know if this is a disappointment for me because I didn't dislike the overall story or anything like that. Maybe we can talk about this first before we get more into the characters and stuff and what we thought of them. And Chris, this wouldn't be something that you would necessarily hone in on as much, but they take some very key ideas from Fallout 3, Fallout 4, some from New Vegas. It's an original story and it's good, but it's almost a little bit too on the nose at times. Like Lucy's main motivation is very similar to the main character's motivation, in Fallout 3.
Yeah.
There's a lot of elements later in the series that tie in pretty directly to what happens in Fallout 4. And that's fine. Like I feel like those elements kind of like if you create certain elements within this Fallout universe, it makes sense for them to pop back up in the TV show. That's totally fine by me. But it's sometimes I think the overall push of the story was a little bit too similar to some of the other games in the series. And I think really some of the most interesting stuff that happens in this show is like the wasteland version of America, which, Charlie, I know you were talking to me about, and you said you were very surprised that that's such a prominent focus of the show, is when it takes place before the bombs fall.
I think you texted when we were texting about it, you said it was kind of like a Vault-Tec origin story, which I don't want you to hear me say that and hear like that it's the whole show is about that, because it's not. But there's really three core like parts of the show. There is the wasteland story, where these three main characters are about to talk about kind of converge. They're all kind of going on this similar mission to find this thing, just like you would in one of the games. And then there is the story of what's happening in the vault after Lucy leaves, which again, it really is just like Fallout 3 in that she has a dad and no mom, and her dad leaves the vault for reasons, and she goes to find him. And then there's the story of Walton Goggins' character before everything, before the bombs fell in 2077. So that initially, when they started telling that story, I remember I told you, Logan, that I was kind of bummed because I didn't think I wanted that. I wanted just the story of the wasteland and the story of the fallout and of what happens after the end of the world. And I was like, I don't need to know this origin story about the vaults and about Vault-Tec and this really extra late stage capitalism and the war and all this stuff. I wasn't super interested in that. But now, being on the other end of watching the whole show, I am incredibly glad that that's the story they told, because it's not a spoiler. I don't want to talk about what happens. That'll be for our spoiler show tomorrow. But they do really reframe how we look at the whole story of the Fallout universe. There's some things we learn about Vault-Tec that kind of change how we're going to view the other games because of what we learn about how the world came to an end. And it was really, I'm surprised that Bethesda let them do. I guess you can't do that in the game, so this is a good way to if Bethesda's always had this idea of what happened, it was nice to be able to put it in a show. But it really, really works, and it lets Walton Goggins really show off his abilities. It was a great showcase for Goggins in all those flashback sequences, and I actually really came to appreciate that. But kind of to your point about the games themselves and pulling things, I get what you're saying, but I feel a little bit different. I liked how they pulled from those specific game stories without being the same story. Because people who have played are going to want a something to attach to. This is such a brand new part of the world that we're exploring, brand new characters. It was kind of nice to have a familiar, it's the Lone Wanderer journey. And it becomes something very different, but it starts in a similar place and kind of lets you latch on to that. It gives you some nostalgia and some familiarity, because, again, if you want to adapt these games with a new story, you have to have something. And that something is how they bake everything into this world, but they also kind of give you a little nugget in the story. And for those asking about the overall connection, with the exception of a thing that we'll talk about on the spoiler show at the very end of the season, that's the only time there is a full, direct, this is from the games connection.
Well, there's some other stuff.
Well, there's little things, but they like it. Yeah. As far as connecting you to potentially the stories of the other games, there's one thing that happens at the end of the show. The rest of it is all just about the world and the way they tell a story. And this story really felt like that. It kind of felt like not a whole game. It felt like one or two of the main quests. Yeah. But so when you get done, you have the sense of accomplishment, but that there's still so much more to do and to learn. And there are side quests that they go on and things. It kind of feels like the game in that way. But I don't know. I think a lot of those story points really made it feel more authentic to what the games had already done. Not as much to me as like a copycat situation.
One thing I'll add about like the pre-war stuff is I feel like that's really going to be a big focus here in season 1. And assuming this is picked up for season 2, which seems likely to happen, I don't imagine that stuff will be as present in season 2. So this really just feels like something that they're going to focus on here in the first season. And then that'll frame what they do moving forward, which in the larger context of the show, I think will be a good decision. Chris, there's something...
I think there's still a little more to tell. But again, that's a conversation for a different spoiler podcast. But there's still some gaps to fill in there. But I do think you're right. There'll be certainly less than what they did here.
There's something you mentioned earlier that I wanted to come and ask you about, because you called it out. Exactly. This is Jonathan Nolan. This is from the guy who did Westworld, which means there's a lot of mystery box storytelling throughout this. And I think that's very present here. This whole show from kind of start to finish just keeps introducing mysterious elements that you don't really fully understand until you get to the finale of season 1 here. How do you think they do you think they handled this well? Because I personally speaking, I think they don't answer some of the questions around like everything that just kind of ties up at the very end, in my opinion. And I feel like they could have answered some more questions scattered throughout the season. I don't know. And just how did you feel about how they kind of approached things in that manner?
Well, actually, I think it was Charlie that called out that it was Jonathan Nolan and Westworld. But with that being said, I also am a fan of Westworld. And if you watch Westworld, what you'll find out is that you are never going to get all of the answers. And so that's going to be probably an ongoing thing. In fact, I mean, I even wanted that, like, when I talked to Jonathan Nolan about this, I was like, what is the plan like here? Because, you know, I don't want this to be a Westworld situation where we don't get, you know, certain answers. And they said they want to do like 1 billion seasons of this. So I don't think we're ever going to like get to the end of all the mysteries. I think they're just going to keep, you know, kind of leaving little seeds and we'll, you know, with more answers come more questions, sort of, so to speak. So I don't know. We'll see.
There are some that we're never going to know about because it's fun to wonder. But there are some that I think are multi-season kind of arcs. There's some things, again, when you get to the end of the show that I'm like, this was tied up, but this element of it was not. It feels like we're going to get more answers later on because Nolan is a long-term storyteller. You know, and also if this is really, really popular, and the Fallout games have had little tie-in like graphic novels and books and things here and there, this feels like a great place to do little spin-off books and things if this is a really huge hit for Amazon. Because there is so much story to tell that they're not going to be able to pack everything they want to into television. And we do have a long time to wait until, you know, Fallout 5 in what, maybe the 2030s we get like Fallout 5.
I mean, going on their current trajectory, it'd probably be out in like 2030.
Because we still have Elder Scrolls 6.
32 or 33.
It's supposed to come out. Maybe they'll fast track this over Elder Scrolls because of the TV show being so popular. You know, I don't think they will. I'm just saying, like, it's a shot in the dark. There's a potential maybe because of the show. But even then, it's 2028 at the absolute earliest. We could possibly get something from this game. I'm saying, like, crazy scenario. This show's a massive hit. They hit pause and everything else. They rush it. That's the absolute insane earliest time we would get another game out of this.
So and what again, you guys even that is crazy. What you guys are saying is that I have time to go replay every Fallout game a few times over before we get a new one.
That is correct. Yeah, okay. It'll be like PS6, PS7, or I guess it's not on PlayStation anymore, but whatever the next gen or two are, it'll be before they arrive that we get.
The company that makes these games, Chris, to give you the short version, they only make one game at a time. They're all sprawling. They all take 6 to 7 years, if not more, to make. They have said that Fallout 5 is the next game they're making after the current game that they're working on, which is Elder Scrolls 6. And that game will be lucky to release by 2028 or 2029.
Yeah, no, I know the Elder Scrolls games are massive. So
yes. So it's going to be a bit.
It's
going to be a long time. But we have the show in the meantime. And like I said, I think there's opportunities with other forms of media.
Sounds like
whether it be comic books or books or whatever.
We're going to have like multiple seasons of the show in the meantime.
Yeah. Yep. We could potentially have this entire show start to finish.
And then
before we get to Fallout 5.
maybe that's where it's all headed. You know what I mean? If that's the case, is there any particular character that's in the show that you guys want to see in Fallout 5?
Not really, just because I don't want Fallout 5 to be in LA. Because the show's in LA. I love that each of the games, again, when I say each of the games, I'm really starting with Fallout 3 because 1 and 2 are very different types of games. They were on PC, very story driven, not the big sprawling open world thing that we've come to know. So 3, 4, New Vegas, 76 are all in different places. And I love that we get to explore different parts of the country through these games. And so I'd be kind of disappointed if we got to the end of this show and then we got to the game and it's the same place that we just watched on TV. I'd love to see it, in what is Fallout in Florida or in Texas or in, the Ozarks or Montana or, whatever. I want to see a different part of the country kind of, explored.
Fallout Ozarks, huh?
Oh, I was right. After I said, I was like, that's probably too close to Appalachia, which is what we get in '76. But
That one was in West
you know,
Virginia. Yeah.
yeah, and they're all really cool settings. So right now, I don't think I want to see anyone else like carry over. But if I have to pick a person, I think we'd all kind of agree the Ghoul is a great character that can kind of jump
Yeah.
between things. Um, he's got a lot of story to tell, and the way they've set up his character, he could be in different times.
That's what I was gonna say.
You know.
That like if they so here's the thing with where this Charlie, you and I were talking about this yesterday, but the show takes place chronologically after all the games. So if they were to come out with let's Fallout 5 and it takes place before the show, then you could feasibly have a character like the Ghoul show up in the game. I don't know if that's something they would want to do, but I feel like
It
that's
kind
the
of
one
seems like
that
the game will be
makes
after
most
this,
sense.
just based on the comments about this being kind of Fallout 5. But for those that have played the games, this is about 20 years after Fallout 3. And like 15, 16 years, I guess, after New Vegas, which I bring New Vegas up because it's the closest, like, geographically. The other three, mainline open world games are all on or near the East Coast. New Vegas is the only one that kind of is fully out west. Deals with the New California Republic and all
Fallout
that stuff.
1 takes place.
Right. That's why I said kind of the mainline open world, like starting with Fallout 3. The ones that we've actually really explored have all been on the East Coast except for New Vegas. So there's a lot of history there with the New California Republic and the Brotherhood of Steel, which are their big elements of the original games too. Because they're in LA and then they go up to I think Oregon is where the second one kind of kicks off. So the West Coast was explored again in those top-down, story-based games. But when you get into the worlds, it's mostly East Coast.
How did you guys feel about this is sort of a three-pronged narrative here spread between Lucy, the Vault Dweller. We've got Maximus, who is an aspiring Brotherhood of Steel member, and then we've got the Ghoul, which is Walton Goggins' character. Which of these three, again, the arcs all kind of merge with one another. Which one? I mean, I'll just say this: Maximus is a character I'm still struggling to kind of like, or I don't know. He's maybe the most complicated character of the bunch here, and I feel like they didn't execute on some of his backstory, which I feel like was very vital for some of the reasons why he is the way that he is. They really only, again, without spoilers, but there's really only like one scene that they continue showing constantly throughout the course of the season to kind of establish why he has the character motives that he does. I think they could have done more to flesh him out, like when he was younger, like why he kind of has these behaviors and motives and stuff like that. Maximus is a complicated character. The Ghoul is as well. Lucy's much more straightforward, but she's kind of supposed to just be this naive person who's exploring the wasteland for the first time. Anyway, I guess going to you, Chris, which of the three characters did you like the most? I think, again, Walton Goggins, you've mentioned, and I know you enjoyed him, but how did you feel about Lucy and Maximus as well in this show?
Yeah, I would say that Walton, I mean, is my favorite, probably hands down. I find him the most entertaining. I mean, both, before the nuclear war and then afterwards is the Ghoul. He's just so good. And honestly, if you compare it to Westworld, sort of replaces, I think, Ed Harris as the Man in Black, is sort of that sort of character. As far as I find Lucy and Maximus to be very similar in their naivete, and that they're both sort of they seem fairly innocent, but I think Ella's a lot more entertaining about it. But Maximus has been growing on me. It took me. He was definitely the character that took me the longest to get into. But I feel like maybe by about episode 3 or 4, there's some stuff that happens that when he's sort of hiding his identity, I don't want to get too deep into it, but I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, but I started finding him more interesting during that, but all three of them are great. And I think the story becomes a lot of fun when the three of these characters sort of converge at different points, during the season, when their storylines cross paths. I think the series really picks up.
How do you feel about them, Charlie?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, again, we talked about the Ghoul a lot. He's really like kind of the linchpin of the world. whereas Maximus and Lucy are our view into there. Which I think with Lucy specifically, they did such a great job of mirroring the Lone Wanderer, not necessarily in terms of the specifics of the story, but of this idea of opening up to this world around you and exploring this world that you don't know anything about, and the element of being naive, but also being smart, because she is incredibly intelligent, but there's some things she doesn't know. And on the flip side, there's things Maximus knows about the above, the surface world, but there are normal things. There's a conversation they have about sex one time, and he is very, very confused about how things work, because he has grown up in a much different place. Raised in the Brotherhood of Steel, which the Brotherhood of Steel in this is going to be another element I think a very small but potentially loud portion of people are going to have issues with, because the Brotherhood of Steel are seen as this symbol and this big serious thing. And I love in this that they're kind of cultish morons. And I really appreciated that take on them. And, you kind of look behind the mask and it's like, oh, they're just idiots like the rest of us. And this is also kind of after the more of a downfall from the Brotherhood, because in like 3, when we see the Brotherhood, they're more at a height of power. This is, again, 20 years later. Maximus is a character that I was unsure the first episode or two, kind of like what Chris said, I was a little unsure of, but by the time I got to the end of the show, I actually really came to love Maximus a lot, because he is very, very complicated internally. And you mentioned, Logan, that they go back to this one little flashback. He has this key memory. But I felt the same way about Lucy. I think they each kind of had this core memory. With Lucy, there's this one scene of her seeing her mom, and they play that over and over again throughout the show. And I think it's the same thing with Maximus seeing the knight. We get this one thing repeatedly because that is their like cornerstone core memory that defines them. And there is more to learn about Maximus, just like there's more to learn about Lucy, and we finally kind of get to that later on. We just haven't had the chance to do it with Maximus yet, but I think they were very similar in how they structured their stories. I know everything I think I need to know about Maximus to know why he did what he did in this show. And I'm really interested in the way his story kind of wraps up in the finale, where he goes next, because now we have this opportunity with this character to do some very new things. Maximus is someone who I think when you really break it, every person who watches the show is going to want to be Lucy. We're all going to want to think of ourselves as Lucy, as this smart, capable, cunning person that can navigate a dangerous world you don't know and make it out on top. But I think in reality, a lot of us are, if you really get honest with yourself, have a lot more in common with Maximus. And he's very unsure of himself and of the world around him. And he has a lot of fear that he is trying to deal with and trying to put on a brave face for. And he struggles with that at times, and he kind of finds in the armor that he has an opportunity to use that as his brave face. And Maximus is very complicated, and he's kind of a lovable, noble moron, and I love that about him. He's someone who I really grew to love. I do want to add, before I stop talking about this, my favorite character on the show is one that is not in those top 3. Well, I mentioned to you one of them, but it's kind of his kind of 1B. Yeah. The 4th lead character in this, Moses Arias, plays Norm McLean, who is Lucy's brother, who stays in the vault when she leaves. And I love Norm, and I love Norm's story. If you've played the games, you know that the vaults are not what they seem. I don't want to say too much to give away anything about the show, but we know the vaults are not what they think the vaults are a lot of the time. And so Norm, his saga is all about exploring the secrets of the vaults, and that was really fun to me. That was the big mystery box that I loved the most, that I really appreciated watching. And anyway, Norm is the one that stuck with me when I was done.
I thought you were going to mention Michael Emerson as Wilzig.
He was great. Also, there's a lot of one-off they're only in a few episodes characters, and he's absolutely. I had a whole list of great guest stars that I don't want to spoil on here. Michael Emerson, we know from the trailers.
Yeah.
He was really, really good in it, especially if you watch Lost, or you know what Michael Emerson can do with roles like this.
Oh, he's great. It's just, I don't want. Yeah, I'm trying not to spoil anything either, but just for the little bit that we get him, he's so good.
And I mean, in the vault, you have a lot of really fun little characters that are all, if you've watched comic stuff, like you have Leslie Uggams from Deadpool is so good, playing Betty. Zach Cherry, who a lot of people know is the guy who filmed. He's in a bunch of stuff, but the guy who filmed the fight in Shang-Chi. everyone in the vault is really
Severance.
funny, but Norm and Chet, his cousin, are. I loved watching them together. Chet's weird little story about being in love with Lucy is really funny, and then what happens with him later on with another character. I loved their stories, and I'm most excited about seeing more of them as we go forward, because Vault life is something that when you play the games, you have the intro with the vault, and then that's really all you get, and you go back later in the games to like some abandoned vaults and to some other things, but actually exploring vault life from a vault dweller's perspective, especially as they start to figure things out, is relentlessly entertaining. And where we leave Norm's story is probably the biggest of the cliffhangers of the season. So
yeah, I think that's the
there's a lot
storyline
to
that
do
gains
there.
the most momentum throughout the course of the season, for sure. And yeah, I mean,
Moses Arias does a fantastic, wonderful performance. He does such a great job.
All right, we're going to put a pin in the conversation here. We're going to have another episode here on the Comic Book Nation feed that comes out later, where we are going to dive into spoilers, because I know there are so many things that we've been talking around this whole conversation that we want to dig into and talk about and kind of theorize where they might be going in season 2, because it seems almost certain that we're going to get a second season of this. I would imagine we might even get that announcement within the next week, assuming that this blows up on Prime. But thank you for joining us for this conversation. Charlie, Chris, thank you for hopping in here. I will look forward to talking to you guys hopefully in the next episode of this that we are doing. And again, this has been Quick Save. This is typically this is a weekly podcast here on the Comic Book Nation feed, all about video games, where we talk about happenings in the video game industry. Obviously, Fallout's coming out, so now we're talking about Fallout. But we have a lot of other shows here on the Comic Book Nation feed, talking about comics, talking about anime. So be sure to subscribe and check out all of those shows. And be sure to stay in the loop for when we come back here and talk spoilers about Fallout in the near future. Until that time, take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.